Welcome to Functional Philosophy, the show in which I, Charles II, explain and apply Ayn Rand's philosophy, objectivism. If you'd like to ask me a question on objectivism or its application, just go to charles2.com/contact. And my last name is spelled T as in tango, E as in echo, and W as in whiskey. Today I'm going to start with a comment from a long time ago that I saved in case I ever needed a substitute for a question that I later decided I wasn't going to answer. I have a whole list of substitute questions and comments that I can plug into my list in case I later change my mind about answering a question. The way I have this set up, it's easier to insert a substitute than to move everything up one, so that's why I'm doing it this way. Alright, so the comment is in response to one of my episodes on gun rights. And the commenter says, "You have very peculiar definitions of initiatory and retaliatory force. Waving a gun around and pointing it at people, yet not actually shooting them, is still a threat of violence. Parentheses, coercion. Still an attempt to force their will on you. However, simply owning a prohibited, in quotation marks, firearm," I don't know why prohibited is in quotation marks. You put something in quotation marks like that when you don't think the word is appropriate, not when you think the description is accurate, but not something someone should actually do. If the cops arrested me without cause, I wouldn't say, "and then the cops arrested me," quote unquote. No, they actually did arrest me. You don't use quotes when you disagree with the action. You use it when the action isn't described accurately. Here you are disagreeing with the prohibition of firearm ownership, not disagreeing that it is being prohibited. So the quotation marks aren't appropriate, you idiot. Anyway, starting the sentence back over just so you can follow it, which I'm going to have to do many times because this comment is dense with mistakes. However, simply owning a prohibited firearm in the privacy of your own home, locked in a safe no one even knows about, is an act of violence? Against who? Justifying force against them? And the reason why I ask against who is because you are illiterate. It should be against whom? But he says, is because you resort to collectivist standards of victimhood. Okay, I've already made one correction in this sentence. Now I'm having to stop for a second, and there is still yet another one before he even finishes this sentence. So, collectivist standards of victimhood. No, it is not collectivism to put someone in jail because he doesn't yet have a specific target. Is it collectivism to put a serial killer in jail before he has selected his next target? He doesn't have anybody in mind yet. You don't know who he's going to hurt, so that's collectivism to put him in jail. No. Knowing that somebody is doing something that will violate someone's rights is not collectivism. Acting on that basis isn't collectivism. It is collectivism if you put somebody in jail because he is harming the group conceived as an entity over and above the people who make it up. But putting somebody in jail because he is inevitably going to violate some individual's rights, even if you don't know who that individual is yet, is not collectivism. So prohibiting somebody from owning something that can be used only to violate rights isn't collectivism just because you don't know whose rights he's going to violate yet. Starting the sentence over, and the reason why I ask against who is because you resort to collectivist standards of victimhood to justify pre-emptive, yet retaliatory, force against someone who has neither committed violence nor threatened its use against any individual person. Please check your premises. So preemptive yet retaliatory. Yes, that is not a contradiction. It is preemptive from the perspective of someone's use of direct force. It is retaliatory from the perspective of someone's use of indirect force. If someone threatens to murder you and you call the police and they arrest him, that is preemptive because he hasn't yet actually attempted to murder you, but retaliatory because he has threatened to murder you. So, your confusion here is just garden variety rationalism. Taking concepts out of context, observing that they contradict each other when viewed that way, and then inferring that they contradict each other in any configuration whatsoever. No, as Aristotle says, a thing can't be A and non-A in the same respect at the same time. And so this is A and non-A, but in two different respects. Hey everyone, it's me from the future. In editing this, I realized that I forgot to comment on this guy's invalid use of violence. He implies, as many libertarians do, that violence is what we want to stop, but violence is not the essence of what we want to stop. Violence is simply the dramatic use of force. But what we want to stop is the initiation of force, no matter how non-violent it is. If the Incredible Hulk comes, and with his giant green hands slowly reaches for you, grabs you, and then calmly places you in a cage, and locks you in there, that's force. It's not violent, but it's force. Anyway, that was just such a glaring and common mistake that I wanted to comment on it. I planned to when I first read this question, but then when I actually started recording, I guess I forgot to. So there you go. Now back to me in the past. Alright, that was fun. Now for the first real question. If the implicit knowledge of all men is that existence exists, from where do the explicit ideas contradicting this arise? Why did it take centuries of bunk philosophers for Aristotle and Ayn Rand to come around and state what is implicit knowledge for all? Well, first, I wouldn't call someone a bunk philosopher just because they didn't name what Aristotle and Ayn Rand named. But the reason why all philosophers didn't state this is because it is implicit knowledge. And to make it explicit takes, as Ayn Rand says, a special act of focus. So, for instance, the law of identity is implicit knowledge. Everybody sees that things are what they are. And yet, very few people hold that idea in explicit terms, and that's because even though you have all of the components of that abstract principle, you have to focus on it and name it if it's going to be explicit. And not everyone does that. Again, as Ayn Rand says, so long as knowledge is only implicit, you are subject to its loss. So this is why people can make logical arguments that the law of identity doesn't hold. Well, they're actually relying on the law of identity to make a logical argument. Logic is the method of non-contradiction, and non-contradiction is an epistemological tool derived from the law of identity. Now, if people made the law of identity explicit, well, then they would see that there's a contradiction there. Oh, I'm saying law of identity is invalid on the basis of the law of identity. But so long as the law of identity is only implicit, then you don't see that you're contradicting yourself. But you can still use the law of identity because it is implicit. It's not as if people didn't understand that they shouldn't contradict themselves before Aristotle worked out the rules of logic, but they understood that implicitly. They didn't name it, and so they were subject to going off the rails. Now, if you're asking literally, from where do the explicit ideas contradicting this arise, which is what you say, well, they come from the same place any idea that contradicts reality comes from, which is from the random associations of your subconscious, or from the misapplication of reason. Those are the only places wrong ideas can come from. Either your subconscious feeds you something, and you just go with it, or you make a mistake in consciously integrating your perceptions. But I suspect that's not actually what you intended to ask, because that applies to all ideas, not just ideas that contradict implicit knowledge. I assume what you meant to ask is, how can we develop ideas that contradict what we know in some sense, even if we know it only implicitly? And the reason is, as I said, because we do know it only implicitly. And so we don't notice when we're contradicting it unless we make it explicit, which takes a special effort. Can you explain the meaning of the term second-handed used by Ayn Rand in the Fountainhead? Because I can't seem to understand its meaning. Is there a context in which being second-handed can be valuable? No, there is no context in which being second-handed can be valuable. Second-handedness refers to the substitution of other people for reality. And this applies in every area. Metaphysically, this means treating the contents of other people's consciousness as reality. So anyone who cares more about what other people think of them than of how they actually are is being metaphysically second-handed. Ayn Rand called this social metaphysics. Think of anybody who doesn't care about actually being smart, but just wants to be thought of as smart by other people. That's metaphysical second-handedness. Or even somebody who is smart, but can't feel that he's smart until other people acknowledge his intelligence. That's second-handed. Or, epistemically, treating other people as your source for knowledge, not your own observations or your own reasoning, but what other people say. If some individual person is your authority, or if you take consensus as the standard of what's true or false. Those are both examples of second-handedness in epistemology. So if you say, well, it doesn't really make sense to me that stretching before I work out does any good because I'm cold, it doesn't seem in my experience to do much good. And that makes sense because your muscles have to be warmed up before you can stretch them out. And you come to this conclusion on the basis of experience and logic. But then you say, well, but all the sports teams do that, so they wouldn't do it if it didn't work, so I'll go with what they do. That's second-handed. Or in ethics, altruism is a form of second-handedness. You may have heard that slogan, I can't remember how it goes, but it's something about how you should judge your life by how many people you've affected. Other people are the standard. What you do only matters insofar as it affects other people. The factual requirements of your own continued existence don't matter. Existence doesn't matter, other people matter. Politically, this takes the form of collectivism. For every individual, it's society, it's other people that matter. Any redistributive political system, that's second-handed. You are having your money taken and given to other people, or you're receiving other people's money and living through them. Likewise, any kind of theft is second-handed because you are living through other people. You're not engaging directly with reality. You're not producing the values that your life and human life in general, in fact, requires. You are instead stealing from other people who have directly dealt with reality. So theft is second-handed. So that's what second-handedness is. It is substituting other people for reality. It is living through and by other people. Acknowledging the existence of other people's beliefs, ideas, and emotions, that's not second-handed. Treating those beliefs, ideas, and emotions as reality, even if they contradict the facts of the physical world, that's second-handed. Learning from other people isn't second-handed. Treating authority or consensus as the standard of truth, that's second-handed. Trading with other people isn't second-handed. Living for or through other people is second-handed. Now, of course, very few people will acknowledge that they do this. I'm not saying to be second-handed, you have to explicitly hold the idea that existence is a projection of other people's consciousness or is less real than the contents of other people's consciousness. Intellectuals do say that, but even just acting that way is second-handed. This ties in with the last question. You would be acting on that implicit idea. All of the elements of that idea are in your awareness and manifest in your actions, but you don't name it. And in this case, because you don't name it, you can't reject it, as opposed to something that's true, which you can't accept if you don't name. But the bottom line is you can't accept or reject something explicitly if you don't make it explicit. And so it's always good to make something explicit, because then you can know whether you should accept or reject it, and then you can either accept or reject it. But yes, even though there are very few people who will assent to the idea that other people's consciousness controls reality, or if a bunch of people believe something, then it must be true, that is how many, many people act. And those people are second-handed. If you'd like to keep up with everything I do, just go to charles2.com. If you'd like to enable me to do more, just go to patreon.com/charles2 and become a supporter. Thanks for listening.